So my top 5 nootropics. Always talk to your healthcare professional before trying any of these. All right. So number 5 is L-tyrosine. L-tyrosine is right here, and it's basically going to be your precursor to other neurotransmitters such as dopamine and norepinephrine. These are important in attention, and I drew them here just to show you their similarities. These are known as the catecholamines because this right here is a catechol group, and that's what basically puts them in that category. This is dopamine right here, and this is norepinephrine down here. Dopamine is important in like reward and motivation as well. All these neurotransmitters obviously have multiple functions. Norepinephrine is also important in wakefulness, and that's going to be in a location known as a locus coeruleus. But again, this is L-tyrosine, and there's several enzymes that are going to work to eventually get you to right here. You're going to feel a little bit not as great whenever you stop it, just a heads up. But again, it's going to make you more focused, and so that's going to be good if you're studying, if you're going to the gym and whatnot. But be careful if you're taking pre-workouts. So I'll probably avoid taking pre-workout alongside because some pre-workouts have L-tyrosine in them, so you can look at that. The next, number 4, is the B-complex. These are important in many things, such as energy production. Example in glycolysis. Glycolysis is basically when you break down glucose to make it usable in the form of ATP, which is what your body uses as energy primarily. And right here, I put a picture of B12 to show you how complicated it looks. I take this B-complex from Walmart. It's actually pretty good. It's a sublingual, meaning you put it underneath your tongue and then you wait, and then and there's instructions right here on the label. There is riboflavin, B2, niacin, B3. This one's going to actually cause vasodilation as well. And then pyridoxine, which is important in neurotransmitter synthesis. And B12, I believe that's important in, it's probably important in methylation. That's some other stuff in as far as genetics goes. Then pantothenic acid. Anyways, but the idea is these are very important. They do a lot of things in the body. They act as coenzymes, meaning that they help your enzymes, which are basically the cellular machines in the body that do most of the work. And so these vitamins are basically helpers. I also take it with a krill oil. I feel a little bit smarter when I take it. The next supplement is L-theanine. L-theanine is found in green tea or regular tea as well, I think. But it promotes calm and focus when combined with caffeine. And it also increases creativity. They say it also increases alpha waves in your brain, which are associated with, I think, the calmness. I'm going to make a comment. Another proposed mechanism of how it calms you down is via the competition of glutamate. Glutamate is your excitatory neurotransmitter, your primary excitatory neurotransmitter, meaning that it increases neural activity. By competing with it, it basically makes your brain less active, meaning more calm. So this is glutamate right here, and then L-theanine right here. As you can tell, the structures are very similar. All right, and so basically, if we drew a neuron right here, this is neuron, and another neuron, and this is a synapse. This is the space between two neurons. Basically, they communicate via the release of neurotransmitters in this space, and then there's an electrical activity known as an action potential. Basically, the movement of positive ions causes a neuron to fire an action potential. And glutamate will do that via the opening of sodium channels and calcium channels in something called an NMDA receptor. So if you block that, you basically decrease this action potential firing, and that means that the communication between two neurons is going to be lowered, and so basically there's not going to be as much activity in the brain. All right. Next is the krill oil. Krill oil is supposed to be like more potent than fish oil, so you can take less for the same kind of effects, I believe. But you can fact check that. It contains DHA and EPA, which are some of your omega-3 fatty acids, as well as something known as astaxanthin, which is a antioxidant. So DHA and EPA, basically what they do is they decrease inflammation by basically competing with inflammatory molecules. So the analogy I can think of is if your inflammation is wearing MMA gloves, the DHA and EPA are basically like wearing boxing gloves. So there's less force, right? So it's gonna basically make the inflammation not as intense because they basically look like these inflammatory molecules, precursors to inflammatory molecules. So they will remove the role of those and cause your cell to make alternative ones which are not as inflammatory promoting. And inflammation obviously has pros and cons. Whenever, let's say you're getting rid of a bacteria, there could be like superoxides that are generated by let's say neutrophils to get rid of the bacteria, and these are uh, oxygen-free radicals, and sometimes they can damage the tissue as well as getting rid of the bacteria. And so the astaxanthin picks up these free radicals and helps neutralize them to prevent this tissue damage. Free radicals are also generated during metabolism in the mitochondria. It's also good for your eyes, your heart, your joints, and your brain, obviously. And I said earlier, I take it with the B vitamins. I think there's research suggesting a combination of the two is good, but I don't know if they were able to like beat placebo or whatnot. The next supplement is phosphatidylserine. Uh, so your cells have, pretend this is a cell, they're surrounded by a membrane like this one right here. So this is a zoomed in view of the membrane, and that's what surrounds your cells. And they're made up of these things called phospholipids. And phosphatidylserine is basically something that tells your cell, can tell your cell to basically commit suicide if the cell is too damaged. So if your cell, let's say, acquires too much DNA damage, it can undergo this process known as apoptosis to prevent, let's say, cancer from developing because the damage is too bad to repair. But it acts as basically, in terms of its role as a nootropic, it improves memory, and you'll feel smarter when you take it. And I think it might also lower cortisol, but you could fact check that. And my final and favorite nootropic is CDP-Choline, also known as Citicholine. This is going to break down into uridine monophosphate. It's also going to give you choline. This is the choline, and this is the uridine, and monophosphate will be one phosphate right here, right? So the uridine monophosphate also has really good neurocognitive benefits. But citicholine overall is going to be really good for your brain health and many other functions. You're going to be more focused, you're going to feel calm, and there's studies showing that you combine it with other supplements. I believe so. The uridine monophosphate, I think, with B vitamins and possibly something else, can promote neurogenesis. And there's debate on whether or not you can grow new neurons as an adult, but there's certain regions like the dentate gyrus in your hippocampus, which can develop new neurons in adulthood. The hippocampus is basically the structure in somewhere known as your medial temporal lobe of the brain. So if I go back to the brain, your temporal lobe is right here, and inside of it, the medial part, hippocampus, and that are very important in learning and memory because basically they're the place where you have like your initial memory, your short-term memory, and then other places in the cortex, which is basically other parts of your brain. That's where the memory basically spreads and becomes permanent. All right. So I'm going to go back and talk about everything in a big picture. L-tyrosine basically is going to give you motivation and focus. B vitamins are going to give you energy. I mentioned the glucose earlier. I think my theory, or probably the reason why I think it also helps a lot of cognition, is because your brain uses glucose, and it's actually one of the few, I guess, the cells in the brain are some of the few that don't need insulin for glucose utilization. And so by having glucose being used effectively, probably helps your brain have more energy. L-theanine is going to calm you down, and it's also going to make you more creative. It looks like glutamate, which is an excitatory neurotransmitter, which means that it makes your brain more active. So by blocking its activity, it's going to make your neurons fire less. Right? Krill oil is going to make your inflammation not as potent. It helps with your joints, your eyes, and whatnot. And the astaxanthin is a free radical scavenger, which means that it picks up inflammatory byproducts, basically, or metabolism byproducts from your mitochondria to prevent your tissues from being injured. Phosphatidylserine is a phospholipid, meaning it's part of your cell membrane, like I drew earlier right here. It surrounds your cell. It's not the only one. It's one of them, and it's basically, it gets flipped on the outer edge, so there's the inner and the outer. When it's flipped on the outer, that tells your cell that basically to commit suicide, so it doesn't acquire, let's say, too many mutations to become cancerous or whatever. Let's say if it acquired too many mutations to become cancerous, it can do that to prevent it from propagating, basically. And then CDP-Choline is broken down into uridine monophosphate and choline. Choline is important for the production of acetylcholine, and there's suggestions that uridine, which is a breakdown product of this, in combination with other supplements, can promote neurogenesis, which is the growth of new neurons. And there's debate on whether or not that happens as an adult, but there's areas that are likely it takes place, in particular the dentate gyrus, which is part of the hippocampus. Thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, please send them in, and don't forget to please subscribe.